Her name was Jerry Gale. She was 5 and already too tall, too awkward, and too silent for her age. Her best friend and next-door neighbor was Melinda Baker, blonde, petite, and sulky. They had been friends before they could talk because they lived next door and it was convenient, and they liked to do the same things: make necklaces out of pine needles, build forts and bridges with oyster shells from the driveway, or role play in elaborate dramas of their own invention. They were interested in moths and butterflies from the wild fields behind their houses, but not crickets, and especially not grasshoppers, because they had too much leg and spit up a dark juice like tobacco in your hand when you caught them. They both loathed their younger sisters, who were whiny and gave them no peace. Their differences were vast. Melinda was pretty, Jerry Gale was smart. However, they were too young to understand the role these biological facts would play in their future lives. They were friends the way that two girls of the same age growing up next door to each other are. They knew too much about each other and nothing at all, because their knowledge of each other was circumstantial and secretly judgmental. However, their parents approved of each other, and thus Jerry Gale and Melinda were destined to be best friends. They played together every day, but on this day, Melinda was missing. Jerry Gale could not stand not knowing why her best friend would not come out to play. She limited herself to ringing the doorbell once every 10 minutes or so. Jerry Gale was a nail-biter, and she sat on the baker's doorstep between rings and worked her ravaged cuticles. Her mother painted her nails with Tabasco sauce daily to force her to quit, but she had long since chewed away this morning's spicy coat. Mrs. Baker's station wagon was in the driveway, leaking oil into the same spot from yesterday, so they were home all right. It was strange that Melinda was not answering her door. It was too hot to stay in the sun much longer. Jerry Gale's T-shirt was soaked with sweat under the arms and down her back. This was the time of day when she and Melinda played games or drew pictures inside the playhouse that Melinda's father had built in the backyard. It was the place they went to escape the midday heat. Jerry Gale hitched her cutoffs up high on her waist like a cowboy and sauntered off with a bow-legged gait. She kicked hard at every pebble that got in her way, until one pebble flew up and pinged the front window. Jerry Gale's mother appeared like a thundercloud and threw the window sash up. "Do that again, and you will answer to your father when he gets home. And what have you done to your shorts? You look like Jackie Gleason. God help me." "But, Mom, I'm a cowboy," Jerry Gale wailed. "No doubt. Skip rope or something, play with a doll. Pretend you're a little girl for once," her mother retorted, "and pull down those shorts now, or I will." Jerry Gale yanked at her shorts until her mother slammed the window closed. She stomped away and threw herself down on Melinda's doorstep, burying her face into her hot-crossed arms. The sun burned the back of Jerry Gale's neck. She hoped that her mother would be contrite and attentive when she came home that night, dangerously sunburned, the skin on her neck crispy and oozing. "What you doing?" Jerry Gale looked up with a start. It was Susie, a small, puckish girl from the house down the street, the one with lots of cars parked in the driveway and on the lawn. She did not know Susie well because her house sat alone at the end of a long cul-de-sac, and Jerry Gale's mother would not let her walk there by herself. "Nothing," Jerry Gale said. She and Susie assessed each other for several beats. "This isn't your house," Susie said finally, brushing straggly bangs out of her eyes. "No, Melinda lives here." "Thought so. She has that neat little house in the backyard, right?" "Mm-hmm." "Well, let's go play in it." "Can't. She's not here. Or I think she's not here. Her mom's car is here, and I never saw them leave. But Melinda hasn't come out all day." "Wow. Maybe something awful has happened," Susie said happily, pressing her face against each of the front windows in turn. Jerry Gale swallowed hard. "You think so?" "Yeah, this kind of thing happens all the time. Don't you watch the news?" Jerry Gale nodded sagely, afraid to admit that her parents wouldn't let her watch the news because they didn't want her to see footage of the war. Once Jerry Gale was watching and she saw a helicopter lifting up from a burning rice field. Her family lived in a subdivision surrounded by rice fields just like the ones on the news, except that those rice fields had been burning. Even the water that covered the rice plants was burning. When she asked her mother to explain how it was possible for water to burn like that, her father snapped off the TV and told her to go to her room. "Melinda could be dead or bleeding on the floor with a knife in her chest," Susie stated matter-of-factly as she peered into another window. Jerry Gale stared at the door, horrified. Maybe her friend was sick or hurt and she had wasted precious time. But then she thought to herself, but wouldn't I have heard something? Melinda's father had left at 7 a.m. that morning, just as he always did, with his lunch in a paper bag and a large green thermos of coffee. No one had left or gone into the house since. But what if? Jerry Gill stared at the scratches on the back of Susie's hand. An awful image bloomed in her mind. Melinda prone on the floor, the blood from her numerous wounds darkening her pink shirt with the ruffled edge. Or maybe Melinda was faking it. Maybe Melinda was deliberately ignoring her, which she sometimes did when visitors came to play. It was hot outside, and Jerry Gill had spent hours yesterday helping Melinda build a castle inside their playhouse out of rope, a broken chair, and a set of sheets with purple roses on them. In their playhouse games, Melinda was always the princess in distress just because she was small and blonde, while Jerry Gill played the part of the monster that threatened the princess because Jerry Gill was tall and strong and had dark hair. It was Jerry Gill's turn to be the princess, and if she really was too big and too freckled to be a princess, then she would be the queen mother, with a beautiful gown that had sleeves that draped gracefully to the floor. Better to be the evil stepmother queen than a hot, snuffling beast. Jerry Gill pressed hard on the doorbell. No answer. She reached for the doorknob, just to test it, of course, and then she was in, temporarily blinded by the cool, dark interior. She hesitated on the threshold as a brief flash of her mother's disapproving face hovered in her consciousness. But little Susie pushed her inside the house with her sharp elbow. Jerry Gill had crossed the threshold, and nothing she did now could ever alter that fact. Melinda's house looked the same as it always did, and yet also entirely different, because Melinda wasn't present to guide and distract her with chatter. It was dark, and the only light was filtered from outside through the chintz curtains. The two girls paused, breathless with fear and daring. Jerry Gill called out in a small voice, "Melinda?" No sound of music or talking or heavy breathing, no dead body on the floor, at least not in the living room, which was full of mismatched furniture and ivy trailing from macrame slings. The girls looked at each other. "Let's split up to see what has happened. Whistle if you find trouble," Susie whispered loudly. "Okay," Jerry Gill said. She tiptoed in the direction of the kitchen, Susie in the direction of Melinda's bedroom. No one was in the kitchen, but here was trouble. There was water and Queen's Anne lace and coneflowers from the fields and broken glass all over the kitchen floor. Jerry Gill stepped cautiously, hoping to avoid the glass shards. She needed to see around the Formica countertop, just in case there was a body or an intruder hiding on the other side. But the evidence presented nothing out of the ordinary. Sorry. Jerry Gill went to find Susie, who was still in Melinda's bedroom, in her closet, actually. Susie was happily absorbed in sorting through Melinda's dolls and doll clothes. It was clearly up to Jerry Gill to find Melinda's body. There was no one in the bathroom either. The only other room in the small house that had not yet been explored was the baker's master bedroom. That door was closed. Jerry Gill's ears pounded with each pulse of her heart. She had come too far to stop now. She had to know what was behind that closed door, even if it meant her own untimely and tragic death. Indian Scout had been one of Melinda's favorite games to play with Jerry Gill. They both loved to hunt their little sisters from behind a screen of tall switchgrass in the fields behind their houses. Her training in scout craft would serve her well now. She reached the door without a sound and carefully turned the doorknob. The bodies of Melinda and her sister Sherry lay on either side of Mrs. Baker. Mrs. Baker lay on her back on the bed, her head propped up by two enormous pillows to protect her hair, which was still wrapped around pink foam curlers. Mrs. Baker was looking straight at her, and Jerry Gill drew in a sharp and noisy breath as several things happened at once. First, Melinda sat up to see what was going on. Second, Mrs. Baker pushed herself off the nest of pillows and stepped onto the floor. And third, Jerry Gill fled the scene, leaving little Susie in the closet with Melinda's dolls. Jerry Gill spent the rest of the day hiding in the field. She watched through the thick grass as Mrs. Baker sent Susie on her way and then walked with sure steps to her mother's door. Jerry Gill could not hear what was said, of course, but Mrs. Baker punctuated the air with arm gestures, and Jerry Gill could get the gist of what she said to her mother. After Mrs. Baker left with her arms crossed, Jerry Gale could see her mother step out onto the driveway and scan the fields where Jerry Gale was hiding, her hand shading her eyes from the sun. Although Jerry Gale knew that she was invisible at such a distance, she still felt the urge to flatten herself against the damp earth. Later that day, about the time that thirst and hunger was beginning to win out against Jerry Gale's shame, Melinda walked out of her house and stood at the edge of the field, just 5 feet away from Jerry Gale's hiding place. Melinda did not call out to her friend, nor did she go into the grass. If she had, she would have found Jerry Gale in 2 or 3 minutes. Melinda looked out over the fields as if she owned them, and Jerry Gale felt the differences in their nature acutely. She felt like a grasshopper, horribly green and bent in all the wrong places. "My mother says that you are a bad seed," said Melinda to the grass in the field. "Mother says that you are not my friend." And with that, Melinda turned on her heel and headed back to her beautiful playhouse with its toys and picture books and small furniture that no longer fit Jerry Gale's long legs. Jerry Gale watched her friends back for a moment, and then she exploded from her hiding place and ran. As she passed Melinda, she pushed her savagely so that the girl fell to the lawn. Jerry Gale did not turn back or even slow her stride to see if Melinda had been hurt by her fall. Thank you.